Hello and welcome back to the Wishing You Well podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Amy Albero, founder of Revive Center for Wellness.
And I'm Katherine Van Eyck. We're both licensed therapists and wellness enthusiasts.
We know how overwhelming it can be to figure out how to navigate your wellness journey.
So each episode, we hope to bring all the pieces together to help you figure out what fits best for you. This week on Wishing You Well, we are discussing conflict, how it shows up and where and how to actually engage in it effectively. But first, some announcements.
Okay, we love groups at Revive. We have been sharing a lot about what's been going on in the groups space, but wanted to make sure that you knew we have our monthly moms group coming up on June 6th from 7 to 8 p.m. This is the last group of the season. And this is an open group. So if you haven't come to the other ones in the previous month, that is totally fine. You can show up on June 6th on Zoom, 7 to 8 p.m. and come check it out. Get some support from our facilitator, Angela Martello, as well as other moms. And link to register is in the show notes. And you can also learn more info there.
We'll also have some other groups coming up, one for senior citizens and another for empty nesters coming soon. And we'll have lots more details on that in the show notes ASAP, but not yet. Just letting you know that those are happening.
Yes, definitely keep your eyes out for that. Speaking of things to watch out for, or maybe just watch in general, we hope that you've been watching Reactivity TV, which is on our YouTube channel, because odds are whatever trending show is out, we are all over it with our therapist perspectives. Every week, Katherine and I commentate on shows like The Bachelorette, which is coming soon. And we just wrapped giving our therapist take on Succession season 4. So really any show out there that you are watching, we are talking about. So there is always so much to watch, and we're always looking for more suggestions on what we should cover next. So let us know what you want us to give our therapist reactions to by emailing us at wishingyouwell@revivecfw.com.
Thank you all so much for being here and listening and following, rating, and reviewing. We do have a review that we want to share. This one is from Lynn's MCS3. They wrote, "Such a nice listen. Love this pod. So nice to hear the refreshing topics and input. Such an easy listen and gives me new perspective." Thank you, Lynn's MCS3. I hope I'm, pronouncing all of that right. And thank you to everybody who has left us a review. We love reading them. We love checking them out. And we do just really appreciate your feedback. We love the opportunity to provide all this information to all of you, all of our listeners. So please continue to give us those ratings and reviews. It really helps us out. Thank you.
Okay, let's get into our episode.
Living full and well pieces to put together. Authentic.
We feel it.
Take care of ourselves.
Conflict.
Ooh. Dun, dun, dun.
It's going to get heated in here.
Yeah. I feel you're saying it's getting heated. I'm getting a little stressed talking about conflict. Yeah, but conflict is a part of life.
Right. Right. But that doesn't mean that you can't get uncomfy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Well, and I feel like as therapists and also just like as humans, like we are helping others navigate through conflict in one way, shape, or form, like nearly every day. It's like a big part of what we do and what we talk about. And so
can you share a therapist anecdote of when you've experienced conflict in the therapy room? Like
conflict
with the client, or the client, maybe you're meeting with more than one person and they're in the heat of a conflict.
Oh gosh, this happens a lot. I mean, well, especially certainly when a lot of my work was with children and adolescents. Whenever parents would come into the mix, certainly there would be like conflict raised there. And a big part of my role at that point was in like helping the individuals kind of step outside of the conflict a little bit, or see what was underneath the conflict in order to better communicate. But sometimes sessions especially when there's more than one person in the room, can get heated for sure. But I've also had conflicts, and we're going to kind of break down conflict because it's not necessarily an argument, but I have had some conflicts exist between clients and myself, whether that's someone maybe disagreeing with my take on something, or maybe I've said something that someone didn't like, or something like that. So maybe there was kind of like an issue raised, or a question, or maybe a pointed statement that's been discussed. But conflict, I find that like conflict in therapy work is so productive, and I love it. What about you?
I think I totally agree. I think as a therapist, you have to get comfortable with conflict. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you know this, but like for listeners that there's when you're working with families, there's a technique called raising intensity, and you're literally inciting conflict in the therapy room with families, mm-hmm. specifically. And I remember when I first started doing that, how much I would shake, and how nervous I would get, and you were literally bringing on potentially an argument, or just potentially somebody getting really upset. And it's supposed to serve to bring the reality of their life into the therapy room, because that's how you can be most effective. But as a newer therapist, it is so uncomfortable, but then you get used to it, and you see how valuable it is. And mm-hmm. then you really work it in. And then sometimes you just see conflict arise, and not from your doing, and like with couples or with families. And yeah, you do have to just get comfortable with it, and sometimes let it play out in front mm-hmm. of you to see the dynamic and see the patterns at play, because you can get so much information from it.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely seeing how in our role, seeing how others respond to or deal with, manage conflict is like really helpful for us to kind of understand how to be supportive, or where there might be areas for kind of growth, whether it's in building skills, or even like emotion regulation, or I don't know, any of it. So it's very helpful. But I was thinking about what you were saying in terms of being kind of a baby therapist, and like having discomfort with conflict. And the same was true for me, of course. And I was just thinking about how so much of my like discomfort as a newbie was like, I want everybody to like get along, and I want everybody to be happy, and I don't want anybody to be mad at me. But that also mirrored how I felt about conflict in my life outside of being a therapist. And as I've grown as a therapist and gotten a lot more comfortable with conflict, and maybe changed my relationship with conflict, I've been able to apply that outside of the therapy room, so to speak, in my personal life. And so I don't know if you had a similar kind of parallel.
Well, it's funny. I was just about to ask you, are you like expert conflict manager in the therapy room and then conflict avoidant in your own life, or has this translated? But that's nice that it has. I'd have to like really reflect on what my relationship was with conflict beforehand. I feel like I've been a very direct person for a long time. I'm just like the person that's like, I got to get this out there. Mm-hmm. That I need to put this out in the open. I can't stand when people put things under the rug, or don't talk about things. That like makes me so much more uncomfortable than telling somebody flat out what I think they're doing wrong, or something like that. I just have never been the person that's like,
right,
wait until the perfect time, or I don't know. I just have to lay it out there.
But it is, I mean, and I think because we're both saying like our discomfort maybe with conflict or whatever, or maybe the repercussions of conflict or consequences of conflict caused us to engage with conflict in two different ways. Me being kind of avoidant, and you just being like, I just gotta like address it. But I think those are two kind of like common paths that people kind of deal with. But like, it feels like unless you are trained in conflict or you have, again, like a healthy relationship with conflict, that conflict can be really, really uncomfortable. And part of what is unfortunate about that is that conflict does exist kind of everywhere. And like, of course, within relationships, there is conflict. And as we've talked about in kind of our relationships based episodes, like conflict isn't a bad thing. It's like part of relationships. When there's not conflict, we get a little like worried. And so our hope today is to kind of demystify conflict a little bit, maybe shift your listener relationships with conflict a little bit, and also answer some pretty common questions that relate to conflict to help you navigate it a little bit differently, or maybe like inch toward a little bit more comfort with conflict.
Right. So you did say that conflict happens in many different areas, with family, with friends, with significant others, at work. So what maybe are some types of conflict that happen in these settings?
Well, I think they could be a mixed bag, right? Like conflict can be like the stuff that you see on the surface where maybe people are bickering or arguing or things like that. It can also be a little bit more passive where people are avoiding one another, or maybe they're talking about someone behind their back, or I don't know, doing things to kind of, the word in my mind is destroy. That's like way too
dramatic.
Too dramatic, but kind of like maybe get a reaction out of someone, or prohibit someone from, I don't know, feeling good or achieving something in whatever way. I mean, it could exist again in all sorts of ways. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that's where it gets tricky, because I find that, especially in therapy, that some of my clients will choose not to engage with somebody in fear that it could cause conflict, where conflict doesn't necessarily, they might not engage with somebody because they're afraid that it could lead to conflict, even if that subject matter has no conflict bearing kind of substance to it, if that makes sense. Like if they're afraid to ask for something, or they're afraid to ask for help, let's say, because they're worried that it could lead to an argument or lead to somebody being upset with them. And so I think there's so many other levels to it and so many other nuances that make these different types of conflict so complicated.
Right. Well, I mean, yes, there's like the conflict, like I described, and then there's like all of the conflict avoidant behaviors that like go on. I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, I have so many clients that I work with that are conflict avoidant, especially as it relates to requesting time off and like worrying like about what potential conflict, whether it's the request itself will make, or like them taking time off will have like the consequence of that. And so then they don't ask. And so there is this element of maybe in some settings, conflicts kind of exist underneath the surface because people are really worried about potential outcomes of even like opening the door for a conflict.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said, that conflict is unavoidable. It's inevitable. And having no conflict actually is worse. Why do you think it's worse?
I think I kind of relate conflict and discomfort with one another. And I think that if people are always kind of comfortable, I'm putting that in quotes, if people are always comfortable, that might mean that they're not necessarily communicating their needs effectively or communicating their wants. They might not be taking risks toward maybe vulnerability in relationships. And so I think like without
missing out on a lot.
Yeah, you're missing out on a lot. Like you're not really taking many risks to get closer or / to get your needs met. And I think, I mean, you're a marriage and family therapist. You work with a lot of couples and families. Like, is there a central theme to conflict, like that you've seen, or some like consistent patterns that you've seen in terms of conflict with others? Like, is it about like conflict isn't just what happens on the surface. It's like something deeper that you might be communicating about. So, for example, when I was talking about in my work when I was working with adolescents and would kind of bring their parents in, a lot of the conflict, while like the subject matter might have been different, the content, so to speak, was different. It was really all about, I mean, it's always about communication, but like the message that was kind of being communicated was around wanting to spend time together or like wanting to be understood. Like those seem to be kind of central themes throughout a lot of the conflict. Didn't matter who I was kind of speaking with, but that was kind of what was putting people at odds, was maybe a difference in priorities or difference in kind of values in that sense that was causing a conflict.
Mm-hmm. No, you're so, I mean, I like that you pointed out the difference between the content and what's really at play here. What can I see? I mean, I'd say, yes, there are some general themes. And at the same time, there's so many different kinds. Like with a family, for instance, it could be the conflict could look like, my 16-year-old not listening to me. Whereas the conflict might actually, like at the root, be more of this parent's not giving their 16-year-old enough independence right now. They're at the life cycle stage of parenting a young child, and they haven't quite mastered the parenting of an adolescent yet. And so approaching that conflict isn't really about getting this 16-year-old to listen to their parent. Sure, that will kind of like play out as you weave in these other themes that are at play of like what's going on, but it's not like where you target it. Same with like a couple. They could be arguing about who picks up who, or who picks up the kids at, basketball practice, but there's something more at play here with the power dynamic in their relationship. That'll be the target in therapy.
Right. Well, and I don't know if this has been your experience professionally or even personally with conflicts that you've been a part of, but I feel like with so many families or couples that I've worked with, or even individuals that I'm working with who are navigating through a conflict in their relationship, like often I hear like the phrase, like, I feel like we're having the same fight over and over again. Or like, and maybe the like argument of the week is different, but like, it's really about kind of a central issue that they like can't seem to resolve or understand or whatever. And so I know you just asked me like why do we want to normalize conflict, or why is conflict a part of relationships? But I think it's also important before we get there to kind of also have our listeners try to take a step back in the same way that we do, and thinking like what we see on the surface of conflict is sometimes a distraction from what might be really going on underneath. And in those examples that we used about, like, for me, I use the taking time off example, or you use the asking for help example. Like that's yes, a problem, but like it doesn't really get at the root of what might be causing conflict or conflict avoidance.
Yeah, so true. There's so much more to look into there. And if it's something that you're in conflict with yourself about, like those examples, that's amazing to do some self-reflection, try and take a whack at figuring it out. And if it's with a significant other, or if it's a work relationship, if you can start to peel it back and try to figure out and define what this problem is and like name it, try to understand from a zoomed out lens, what else is going on here? Why is this so familiar? What are the similarities between this fight about the dishes to this fight about the bed not being made that give me the same feeling? And what is that feeling? Is that feeling disappointment? Is that feeling just a general frustration? Is that feeling like you're getting the short end of the stick? Is that feeling like you're over functioning? What is that? What does that cause you to end up doing in the relationship? Like what role do you end up taking on because of this conflict? And also, how does that end up then making you feel about the person or the people around you that are involved in this conflict?
Yeah. No, those are really good self-reflection questions. And I know we'll get a little bit more into, like, as you're describing, like some different ways to manage or think about conflict. But I completely sidetracked us with your question, with my answer to your question around is like why I had said at the beginning, like we kind of get a little concerned when there isn't conflict or that like, and I don't know, I guess I was kind of wondering your take on that.
Well, I usually just think that there's something else going on that they're not wanting to look at, not wanting to address, and maybe not forever, but just yet. Like timing is a huge aspect of even going to therapy. But then once somebody walks through your door, it doesn't mean that they're going to divulge everything right away. Sometimes, I mean, you and I know that the clients can bring out something when we've been working with them for a long time. And it can kind of throw us off sometimes, but it makes sense. People just, it doesn't take, I mean, there's not a certain amount of time that it takes for somebody to completely think like, all right, I'm ready to talk about this. As comfortable as they can be with you. So yeah, I think when there's not conflict, but especially like somebody's still coming to therapy, then there's more going on than we know. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's so true. Like I was thinking about a couple of like client interactions flashed in my mind where like at an intake session, an initial session, I'll ask about like, like, tell me about your family. And it's like, all good, great upbringing, nothing to see, like nothing to talk about here, nothing to see here, like all good. Next. And then it's like literally years later that we might get to like, oh, like some family dynamics or family patterns, family conflict. And part of it is, I think a lot of maybe discomfort or in going there, and also just maybe lack of awareness. I know when, particularly like as it relates to family stuff on our adult children episode, we talked about how like sometimes you need distance from or perspective in order to kind of like see what's there. But I also was thinking about other interactions I've had where like people might say like, oh, my relationship is perfect. We get along wonderfully. Like, and they're not even like a part of the therapy at all. And it's kind of like, again, kind of curious, a question mark, like, how can this be? And as you're saying, like, there might be something that they might not want to see there. And I think the reason we kind of flag that is because like, whenever we've talked about relationships, I'm thinking back to like our healthy relationship episode. Like whenever you put two people together who are different, you're by matter of you being not someone else, like you are two different people, there's bound to be differences which can lead to conflict. And so conflict doesn't necessarily have to be this bad thing. I think it kind of gets that reputation, but like conflict is difference, basically, or a difference expressed. And so I think if we're to think about it that way, that I think it can allow us to be a lot more honest about, as you were saying before, like maybe dynamics that highlight difference, or different ways of communicating, or different needs, different priorities, all of that stuff that seems to be at like the crux of conflict. And so, of course, when you put two people or more than two people together, you're going to expect there to be some conflict. And if there's not, then that probably does relate to someone not being very honest about what their needs are, what their wants are, or whatnot.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's so simply stated that conflict is difference. Mm-hmm. And all the feelings that might come up around it are like, I'm getting uncomfortable even just thinking about this, because I'm thinking about all the conflict that seems never ending in life, my life, personal life, etc. Like it all amounts to, there's a difference here. There's a difference of opinion. There's a difference of like how I would do something versus how they would do something. And sometimes these things aren't solvable. Mm-hmm. And that sucks too, to know that that there's this difference. Does there have to be conflict just because there's this difference?
Right. Or if there is a conflict, or if there is a difference that is unresolvable, does that mean that your relationship or the relationship is doomed?
I don't think so. And like, that's what like really gets me worked up is when people just label something as like kaput, because they think that because there's this difference, now there's this conflict, or there's been conflict because of this difference before, that now it means that, well, we just can't even, work together. We can't figure, we can't have this difference and also coexist somehow. That gets me really heated. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Really upset.
Right. Well, and I think, in knowing you, like, I think it speaks to your relationship with difference, and similar for me, and for many of us who work together, that like we see difference as an opportunity, right? Like an opportunity to maybe get a different perspective, alternative perspective, a different view at things, see things through a different lens, maybe learn something different about ourselves or about others. Like, it seems like an opportunity where I think, as you're describing it, that others might see it as a roadblock, where we kind of see it as a bridge maybe. And again, like that's taken a lot of like work and training, right. but certainly, like, I guess, of course, there are extremes and exceptions to everything, but I don't think it needs to be a hard and fast rule of like, okay, we can't resolve this point of conflict, therefore we need to be done. Like, I don't think it needs to be that way. Like you're saying, I think that it might relate to your ability to tolerate discomfort around this unresolvable thing. But again, that takes effort and work too. It's easier to just cut ties, or call it quits, or cut somebody off.
Yeah. Well, and this reminds me, I was listening to the Genius Life podcast, and one of the episodes, I forget who the guest is, but Max Lugovier was talking to somebody about happiness and how to basically like live a happier life. And the guest talked about family relationships and talked about conflict, and he said that he feels like the only time where conflict should drive people apart is in situations of abuse. Mm-hmm. And any other thing can be either set aside or resolved, etc. And I just thought that was so powerful, and that like people think so often that these other aspects can give you a feeling enough of this is too much for me to handle. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be something that you can handle or figure out how to handle.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you hold on to these grudges and you hold on to these, you cut yourself off, you're not allowing yourself the happiness that you could have. Because when you're holding on to that, you're not really letting it go. The conflict still exists.
Right. And it shows up in your other relationships, I imagine.
Oof. Oh, so true. Yeah.
I like that as kind of a guideline or framework in terms of course, abuse, neglect. Yes, that is a reason to kind of cut ties, say goodbye when safety is at risk. And yeah, these other things can be an opportunity. And again, I think it is really about increasing your distress tolerance, your ability to sit with that discomfort. And again, the discomfort is often what drives conflict avoidance, or maybe and maybe I'll ask you about this in a second, but like for those people that more are kind of aligning with your relationship with conflict is like, I just want to have this out or whatever. I just want to get this out. Like being able to sit with that discomfort a little bit more so that you can more mindfully and thoughtfully show up in conflict or confrontation. That's like emotion regulation, distress tolerance is really at the key to being productive in conflict resolution.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about what it means to and what it looks like to be conflict avoidant.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to describe
Tell me about it, Amy.
Do you want me to describe myself? Well, I
just want to say I would never peg you for that.
Why? Tell me more.
I don't know. I feel like you're good at it, but maybe it's in certain settings.
Yeah. I mean, I work really hard at it because I know it's like been an issue. And so conflict avoidance for me, and again, for others, in a lot of ways, I feel like you could just like copy paste our people pleaser episode into this portion, because a lot of conflict avoidance is essentially where you might be putting the comfort of someone else above your own. And that might cause you to maybe move differently in terms of how you confront or deal with the kind of issue at hand. Mm-hmm. And so in my experience personally, and also just anecdotally, like professionally, is like the conflict avoidance is that like initial sense of like avoidance of like discomfort, like that little bit of relief of like, okay, I'm not going to deal with this, or like I'm worried about how this might play out, so I'm going to delay, or like, it's not really that big of a deal. Like all of those potentially self-invalidating things and avoidant things that provide that like immediate burst of like, okay, I can just move on. But over time, kind of, they don't go anywhere, right? Like those feelings, those experiences, those dynamics, whatever it is, they persist. And so does your reaction to them. And so for me, the reason that I've had to work so hard at this is because it's led to a lot of feelings of built up resentment over time, which then like caused me to like act out anyway. And so it was just kind of prolonging conflict to a point where like I couldn't hold it in anymore. And I see that happening across many of the people that I work with too, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna hold it in. I'm gonna hold it together. I don't want to cause any waves. I don't want to rock the boat. But guess what? A storm is coming if you don't.
Well, it's kind of like anxiety, and like if you push it down, and then out comes the panic attack.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And the other thing I do want to highlight, I brushed by it just a second ago, is like the self-invalidation that comes with conflict avoidance. Like if something is like bothering you and is creating conflict within yourself, I think we owe ourselves the responsibility to first listen to that. Like, why is this bringing up so much for me? You, of course, can check yourself to see, is this disproportionate to maybe the situation at hand? Should I really be this like seething at whatever the situation is, like kind of give yourself kind of a gut check there. And then I think what the danger of conflict avoidance is that then you tell yourself, you know what, it's not a big deal. You should just get over it. Like, just move on. Like, just keep the peace. And all of that just completely invalidates yourself, your emotions. And over time, that leads to a lot of self-doubt, lack of self-trust, lack of self-esteem. And so it's kind of a breeding ground for a lot of negativity individually. So conflict avoidance is not good at all. It's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. When is it helpful?
Well, I think when, like, there have been plenty of times where this happened recently, where something happened that like pissed me off so much. I felt so angry and really wanted to address it. It was something that needed to be addressed. But I felt way too angry to be productive and to maintain my integrity, like as a person, to like engage in a way that like reflected who I am and who I want to be. And so I like pushed off the conflict until I felt like I'm in a more grounded place, a more empathic place to myself and to the other person. So I think that's a reason, maybe, is when you can't get to a productive space.
Yeah. I mean, I think the same goes for somebody that's more confrontational. And going back to what we said before, I think like, I thought that I would need to figure out, okay, well, what's the difference between what I know now and how I, show up with conflict in the therapy room versus in my life, and thinking that I've always been direct. I think I've been direct, but like maybe it wasn't super productive, like you're saying. Whereas now you're so right that confrontation needs to still have empathy, still have this level of compassion. And that's the difference. That before probably it was just a little more blunt and was just outright, this is how I feel. And now it's more like, it's so therapy. But it's more, let me phrase this in a way that I let you know how I'm feeling, and I'm curious as to why you might have done this the way that you did. I always come from that standpoint of like, okay, how can I ask them about this? Because I know that this person doesn't want to deliberately upset me. I know this person doesn't want to, intentionally hurt me. So how can I approach them in a way that says that? How can I approach them in a way that says, I know you, and this doesn't seem like you. What's going on? This is how I'm feeling. And that's not always easy to do. But like you said, sometimes if you're feeling more reactive, that's not necessarily the time and place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of represent the more like confrontational flavor of conflict. Like, and so what is that like?
To hold back when I'm feeling reactive.
Or maybe to not. Like, how has that worked out to have that feeling of like, I want to address something and then just like do it?
Okay, so here's a good example. So when the conflict has not directly been with me, but it is just indirectly. So like with in-laws, for instance, because I'm not the blood family member, I've really had to contain myself sometimes when I really wanted to speak out and I really wanted to be more direct and confrontational, because my husband has his own experience and his own feelings about how he wants to handle it. And I need to respect that, because he's the one that, is the actual relative. So that's been really difficult, but it's not my place. And so I've really tried to hold back, even with him sometimes too, where I have to respect where he's at and not necessarily push him to do it the way that I want to do it. And yeah, that's really difficult.
Yeah. Right. So you're still you have like kind of a built-in space almost, because you kind of understand like the different relationship dynamics, and maybe it might not make the most sense for you to be the one kind of like in the conflict. And so like you've kind of with having that like different relationship, it's allowed you like that space to be a supporting role in whatever conflict there is.
Yeah, well, and it's not that it wouldn't be appropriate. Like I do feel super comfortable saying things with my in-laws, thankfully, but it would just disregard my husband's feelings completely. And that I don't want to do. Yeah. And so that's what's really helped me is knowing, okay, he's in a different position and he's also in a different place with this conflict. And I can't make him be where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, my mind is like spinning about all the ways that we could just talk about what you said. Maybe it is a whole other episode in terms of in-laws in general, but I was just thinking about that as well. Like how sometimes like when the conflict isn't about us, in-laws is a great example of like, maybe, I don't know. I'm thinking about something going on kind of distantly in my family, which is like two of my aunts are maybe in an argument, right? Like that has nothing to do with me, like has nothing to do with my immediate family, my family of origin. And then there's a part of me that's like, ooh, but like,
I want to jump in there.
I have all these opinions about it, but it's, again, has nothing to do with me, doesn't affect me at all, except that I hear about it sometimes. But I think sometimes like when we might see like a right or a wrong, like that it might capture something within us that like wants to, whether it's advocate or like get it mixed up in there, that like creates more conflict internally and just within whatever the family system is. But it's really tempting especially when conflict is already brewing, to not get involved in whatever way, like even just like mentally kind of like thinking about it.
Oh, mentally forget about it. I'm there.
Yeah.
I need the secret ingredient for how to remove myself mentally. I mean, can we have an episode on that?
It's really hard. But so I want to go back to something else you said before we move on, because I think it's so key. And I don't even know if you realized that you said it, but you had said something like in your very therapist version of like how you might now currently address like conflict. You said something like, I know that you or they weren't purposefully trying to hurt my feelings. And I love that you said that, because I think that oftentimes what creates more conflict is the story that we tell ourselves around what a person's intentions were, that their intention was to harm us or hurt us, that it was malicious. And that kind of creates a bigger, again, narrative around what happens. It feeds the conflict when it might not be accurate. And mostly we probably don't know. We'll never know. And so I just want to I love that you put that there, because I think, a principle of dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, is that everyone is doing the best that they can. And if they could do better, they would. And I think if we can try to think about people and relationships in that way, it would save us a lot of difficulty in managing some of the tensions that can exist. Because that can, if we can just operate on that level of like, they did the best that they could here, their intention probably wasn't to harm me. If I can start at that baseline, that allows me to get to empathy and compassion and groundedness a lot faster than that bitch.
Right. Oh, so true. So true. Oof.
So, yeah. So
yeah, people get really stuck in their own narratives of something, their own experience. And when they're stuck in their own experience, they're not even open to resolving, because the only way in their experience to resolve is for this other person to completely concede and say, you're right, you're always right, and I suck. But as soon as you can get put in that position of, well, I know this person really loves me.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they wouldn't do this on purpose. So how can I work from that standpoint to try to understand how we even got here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, right. Or even on the other side, like maybe it's a colleague or maybe it's a stranger on the street, right? Like that we can still jump to those conclusions of like, I don't know, my boss must hate me or my colleague must be out to get me or that, I don't know, stranger on the street just, I don't know, was targeting me or whatever. Like we don't know that. And that's likely not true. Like it's most likely that somebody's having a bad day. They themselves were triggered, whatever it is. Like, and any time that I think back, even this situation I described from like 2 weeks ago, what was fueling the anger so much that I needed to take space from it was all the ways I personalized what was going on and kind of like made a bigger story to myself around why someone was behaving or treating me in the way that they were. And none of it, was, as far as I know, accurate, was not helpful to me, and things I would never know if are true or not. Like this person would never come out and say, you know what, Amy, I hate your guts and I just want you to suffer. Like no one's going to give me that satisfaction. And so it doesn't really help me at all. It like prolongs the like internal conflict.
All right. Should we get into some common questions around conflict?
Let's do it.
So one of them is there a way to engage in conflict without everyone being mad at me?
I don't know. Please tell me the answer.
Well, I think that we just kind of said it, right? Like you could be conflict avoidant or you could be confrontational and figure out this balance of how can I express the way that I'm feeling and also go about this in a way that's trying to understand where they're coming from. And that's where the productivity is going to come in. And that's where, and they're not going to be mad at you for asking how they're feeling. So yes, there is.
And I guess the other point that I'll add, but before we started recording, I was telling Catherine about kind of a conflict that I had worked through in my life. And I guess the thing that, again, in therapy, we talk about a lot, which is that with any kind of rupture, AKA conflict, there's an opportunity for repair. And like you can always repair, you can always go back. And so maybe you didn't show up like in confrontation in the most grounded way. And maybe you did piss somebody off, or maybe your relationship does feel a little bit fraught or fractured. Again, that doesn't mean all is lost. It gives you an opportunity to lean in and say, hey, I didn't really approach that well. I feel like what I said kind of got lost in emotion. It looked like I hurt your feelings. I'm so sorry, or whatever. Okay, we didn't really handle that well. This is going to come up again. How can we handle it better for the next time we're inevitably going to have a conflict? So I think even if people are mad at you, that's okay. It's okay for people to be mad. I'm telling myself this as I'm saying it out loud, but like, and that's okay. You can still work through that.
Yeah, that's a great point. That just because they're going to get mad doesn't mean that all is lost.
Right. So next question, kind of maybe going off of that, I'm going into what I know will be a stressful interaction, and I'm worried about how I'm going to feel afterwards. How do I stop myself from ruminating about what went down?
Yeah, this is where I'm like, Amy, tell me.
So this is a scenario where, I don't know, so maybe you just kind of had one of those like more confrontational exchanges with someone, and then you leave and you're like second guessing everything, or you might be worried about like how they're feeling, how you're feeling, what your relationship is like,
what happens next.
Yes. Yeah. Well, how have you dealt with it? You're the one who loves to just be direct.
I ruminate. That's why I was asking you to tell me what you do.
Yeah, it could be really hard to not, right? Because I think a lot of times people ruminate because maybe they care about how other people might perceive them or experience them, but they probably care about the relationship and the other person too, and don't really want to cause harm or don't want to prolong conflict. And so it makes sense. Like the rumination is, I guess, a reframe for that would be like, it's an indicator of like how much you care about what's going on. And so I guess what I would suggest in terms of anytime anyone is ruminating is to, I'm going to sound like a broken record today, like try your best to be grounded and do something to kind of help you move you out of your thoughts. And whether that's doing something active, like move a muscle, change a thought kind of idea, do something maybe a little bit distracting, talk with someone who, not necessarily about this. I wouldn't like fan the flame by like getting other people's perspectives on, you know, what went down, and doing a play-by-play for others probably would not help, but maybe do something again, maybe distracting that can help kind of shift your thoughts away. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no. And also if like you are like the question is, I know I'm going to go into a stressful interaction. So how can I plan to keep myself from ruminating? Mm-hmm. I mean, doing all the things that you're saying is great. And if you know that you're going into this stressful situation, how can you set yourself up to make sure you put yourself in these grounding situations? Or how can you make sure you put yourself in a situation where you're ready to go be active outside so that you can clear your mind? So really plan for that next step if that's something that you're worried about.
Right. Well, and even before that, as you're talking about that too, you're right. Like there is that planning aspect. Like in order for us to be at our best, at our least vulnerable emotionally, it helps if we kind of set ourselves up for success before even going into it. So like as much as we can, like be well rested, make sure we've eaten, like make sure we've done something even before going into a stressful event that helps like kind of get our baseline level of emotion kind of down, so that there's not like just a small jump from like a 6 to an 8, like that we can be more at a 3. It takes a lot longer to go from a 3 to a 10 than like a 7 or 8 to a 10. And so the best that you can like pre-plan, but before the stressful event too.
Okay. So we have discussed conflict. We didn't get into a conflict in our conflict talk, but what we really want to highlight here is to not fear conflict, that conflict can be a healthy thing, and not engaging in conflict is actually not healthy. So being mindful of the kind of conflict you are engaging in, you know, whether you are avoidant or confrontational, will be helpful, of course. And then trying to work in this balance of how can you make this conflict productive will potentially change your relationship with conflict.
Mm-hmm. And if there is kind of a specific conflict that you're navigating or anticipating or avoiding, you can send us a little bit about what's going on. Submit that to wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com as part of our listener email episodes. And we'd love to kind of help you navigate your kind of specific challenge with conflict. So yeah, let us help you.
All right. Well, one last thing. We have to talk about self-care. We have to ask each other what is on our menu. And Amy, are you ordering an appetizer, main course, dessert, or 3-course meal today?
I'm ordering a main course. I for what's felt like months, maybe 6 months, maybe more, I've just like not been able to like get into a groove in terms of working out in a way that like I can maintain consistency around, because I'm just like not really enjoying anything I've been doing. But this last week, I kind of like turned a corner and like just found kind of a rhythm, like kind of a set of like workouts that I've been enjoying, and I have loved it. And it just reminds
me. What are they?
Well, it's just kind of a mix of like a bunch of like a little bit of cardio, but like a lot of strength training and some balance related stuff. And so it feels like it's challenging my body and my mind. in a way that I've been craving. And yeah, I'm having a good time with my workouts, which I haven't in a really long time. And I forget every time what a difference it makes when I'm moving consistently and I'm enjoying what I'm doing.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yay. Finally.
Movement.
Yes.
I feel like this goes through, you go through waves with this too.
Yes. And I think what feels frustrating is this is new. Like I was just talking about it with my family. Like I've been like very consistent with like fitness and like my physical activity for literally 10 years, like very consistent routine, like just kind of a no-brainer habit part of life. And then just again, 6 months ago, like it just completely changed, which has completely thrown me for a loop because I was like, I have this hacked. Like I figured it out. 10 years. That's a long time. And so it's felt like way more focal or like even more like stressful because it's like, I thought I figured this out. And now, yeah, it has been a journey. So hopefully I'm back in a rhythm.
Yeah. Well, and that just goes to show how much self-care just needs a constant check-in, whatever it is.
Yes.
And a rework.
Yes. Well, what about you? Well, first, wait, sorry. I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
And then interrupt this question with another question. I want to preface this by saying this is our first episode recording since you went on vacation. And so I will ask for like a little vacation update. In addition to your self-care menu item.
Okay. So 2 things with that update. One, the vacation was really nice. It was really relaxing, kind of like exactly what I wanted it to be and like needed it to be. It was just, I just took in some sun, not too much because I got a little a little tan line because it was hot. I was in Aruba. It was hot and really windy. So I was really scared that I was going to get really burned. So I was adamant about my sunscreen application.
That's self-care too.
Yeah. That also was. And it was also really relaxing and in a different way than other vacations had been because I'm pregnant.
Woo!
Yeah. This is not Amy's first learning of this. Which goes to what I was going to say was that partially self-care confession is that I'm like at time of recording this, I'm like halfway through my pregnancy. Wow. And so I don't know where I'll be when it releases, but earlier it was not easy. I was having a really hard time in that first trimester. And so when we had self-care menus, I was like, what I really wanted to say, but I didn't want to reveal yet. But what I really wanted to say was like, I'm surviving. I'm sitting on the couch eating mac and cheese because that's all I can get down. And I'm taking lots of naps. And that's like this, that's all I could do. Yeah. It was really, really hard. Yeah. So my self-care changed drastically in those weeks, but now I feel like a normal human and can do my normal self-care things, which feels amazing. I feel like myself, but yes, partial self-care confession. That was rough. I wanted to be like, don't put anything on my self-care menu besides just living. Yeah.
I mean, well, congratulations. So
well, thank you.
Excited for you and your husband. And like, that is also self-care too, right? Like just doing what we need to do and nothing more. And I don't know if there were points during your first trimester that you like wanted to push yourself, or maybe it just like didn't even occur to you because you just like weren't feeling so great, but that you did just listen to yourself and listen to your body and eat what you felt like you needed, just kind of like got through it, like with as much grace as you possibly could.
It wasn't even like what I felt like I needed. It was like, what is not disgusting right now?
What you can tolerate.
What can I tolerate? Which was a really huge self-care shift because, like, just like you, I love to take care of myself. I love to feed myself nourishing foods and move my body. And I could do neither of those things during that trimester. And so I had to totally change my relationship with what self-care meant. And so at first it was like disappointing. I was like, this is not me. And then I was like, okay, this is me for now. And I can deal with this because this is just how it is. So I got to deal with it. And it's temporary too, was a huge thing that kept me going. And, you know, obviously knowing that there's a little baby that's going to come out of it. But yeah, the self-care, I'm talking about a self-care, you know, redesign. That was that.
Yeah. Right. I mean, and I guess what we both kind of highlighted is that like self-care does look different in different seasons and during different transitions. And we have to adapt in order to kind of survive and make sure that we're getting what we need, even if it isn't always what we want. But yeah, well, I'm glad that you're feeling more like yourself and engaging in other aspects of self-care in addition to mac and cheese and crackers and stuff.
Yes.
So, good.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, keep us posted on your self-care / baby journey if you're willing.
Yeah, I'll be honest going forward.
Okay, good. We want to hear. To all of you listeners, we hope that you are checking in with yourself as well about your self-care. And again, give yourself the permission to readjust, to reassess what you need and, you know, treat yourself accordingly. So we will continue to check in with our self-care each week, and we encourage you to do that too. But we've made it to the end of our episode, and we want to thank you again for being here, for listening, for following along, for all of the reviews and the follows on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Revive Center for Wellness, where you can watch those episodes of Reactivity TV, as well as so much other amazing content, nutrition-related content. You can learn more about our therapists. We have other wellness tips. So it's a great resource to check out. You can also follow along with Revive on Instagram at ReviveCFW, on our website at revivecfw.com. You can follow Catherine on Instagram at Catherine Van Eyck, me at Amy Albero LCSW. And don't forget to email us any feedback, reviews, and your listener questions to wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com. Thank you again. And until next time, we are wishing you well.